And welcome back to the Dean Obeidallah Show. Right now, very happy to welcome to the show for the first time Congressman Peter Welch, a Democrat elected to Congress in 2006. He's now the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in the beautiful state of Vermont, filling the seat that's opened by the resignation of the retirement of Senator Patrick Leahy. Congressman, welcome to the show. And I mean sincerely, Vermont is beautiful. Like, I'm from Jersey. I know the bar is low, but it is a beautiful, beautiful state.
Well, it is, and it's a fall foliage. So come on up here and, spend some money and take in some beautiful outside sights.
Well, so let's talk about, you've been in the House since 2006. You won that election, sworn in 2007. You've done a lot of great work. So why this? Let me just ask you right at the top here. Why the Senate now?
Well, of course, the big reason is Senator Leahy, after 48 years of extraordinary service, is retiring. He's been just rock solid for us in Vermont, and he's going to be very, very difficult to replace. In fact, my hope is to succeed him. But the real reason I decided was, after January 6th, which was just a stunning event in our history, that the mob attacking the Capitol, shots fired, people died, and then 147 of my colleagues voting against the peaceful transfer of power to certify the election of Joe Biden. It really dismayed Vermonters and all of us. And the question we each had to ask is, what can I do to try to help? It's an all hands on deck moment. And as a member of Congress for Vermont, I'm a statewide candidate. I've been a statewide candidate. I've done well in my elections for eight times. So I think I'm in the best position to carry on the Vermont tradition and Senator Leahy values. And I think it's really essential that we deal with some of these urgent problems right away.
And I know in Vermont, there's an expression, the Vermont Way of Governing. Can you share what that is so we can all get it?
Yeah, we have town meeting in Vermont, and it's a place where budget battles are fought, and they're very contentious because it is local taxpayers who are going to be paying the bill for whatever is approved in the budget. Mm-hmm. And there's a real civil dialogue. There's a lot of conflict, a lot of disagreement, but at the end of the day, the vote is taken and people move on and accept the outcome of the majority vote. Also, there's been a spirit in our politics where you listen more than you talk, and where there's a premium on cooperation and consensus rather than conflict and confrontation. I'll give you an example. I was the Senate president for some time. Mm-hmm. And had a lot of authority in appointing chairs to committees. Well, in Vermont, I appointed then Senator Phil Scott, now Governor Phil Scott, a Republican, to chair a major committee. And, in Washington, when I say that, they think I need a mental status exam. But I said, no, he was a good partner, and you have a seat at the table and you listen to other points of view, and you can make progress. That's kind of how we do it in Vermont that is so different. But, frankly, Dean, we need that in D.C. People are dismayed about just how combative it is. And oftentimes the combat isn't even about substantive issues. It's just about the back and forth accusations.
I agree. Although conflict is good for talk radio, so let's not ruin all of it when you're in the Senate. But you give us a little bit of conflict here or there wouldn't be bad. So how much, you mentioned January 6th, though. I want to talk about another issue that is on the radar everywhere, and that is reproductive freedom, the right for women to control their own destiny and self-determination. In Vermont, how much is that an issue as you travel your state?
Well, it's a huge issue. In Vermont, in fact, our legislature went through the process of approving a constitutional amendment to enshrine Roe v. Wade reproductive freedom in the Vermont Constitution. And voters this November in Vermont are going to have the opportunity to adopt that as a constitutional amendment. So that's an indication of how important it is here in Vermont. And it really, that Dobbs decision raises two questions. One is, it's the first time that a constitutional right that women have enjoyed for 50 years literally has been taken away by the court. It's stunning. When you think about that, our court, we're not expanding rights, but diminishing them. Right. Secondly, it's a real indication of how dangerous our Supreme Court is, because the reasoning they use to take away a woman's reproductive freedom, saying if it wasn't in the Constitution at the time the Constitution was written, which is kind of a crackpot originalist theory, then it's not entitled to constitutional protection. So that means gay marriage or interracial marriage or birth control. So the implications of what the court is doing are very, very bad, as well as the actual decision that the court made that denies women their own ability to make their own decisions.
Has it been surprising for you, not only that decision, but then we're watching Republicans in certain states ban abortion, even in the case of rape or incest? And they're not shy about saying this is based on their sincerely held religious belief that life begins at conception. And I'm a person of faith. I respect people's religion, but I don't want anyone's religion to be the law of the land. Has that been surprising in 2022, where you're actually just seeing turning religion into law to use it to oppress women?
Yeah, it is. And that's actually a really good analysis, because, during Roe, abortion is a very, very tough decision for the woman who has to make that decision. But when we had Roe, each woman was entitled to make the decision that she felt was best for her. No woman was entitled to impose her will on another woman. Now, especially with the religious background on abortion, a lot of folks who are anti-abortion, it comes from a place of faith. Well, that's fine for them.
Right.
But it's not necessarily fine for everybody. And everyone's entitled to their own faith and to make their own decision. And what's very alarming to me about this, in addition to just how it profoundly compromises a right a woman has, is how it flames further division in our society. Because now you have a lot of folks trying to impose their will on other citizens who are entitled to make their own decision. Extremely divisive decision by the Supreme Court.
I agree. And the hypocrisy of the right. And I think sometimes we call them out for our own sanity in a way, because, as we're sitting here today, you have Senator Rick Scott and Senator Tom Cotton, who, if you win, you're going to be in the Senate with them, Republicans heading to Georgia to campaign from Herschel Walker. Well, both of them are extremely pro-life or anti-choice, I should say. I don't call it pro-life. And Tom Cotton especially literally said on Meet the Press that life begins at conception and there should be a constitutional amendment to protect them. But this level of hypocrisy, is there no principle left? I mean, how do you find common ground with some on the right when they seem to be devoid of principle? And I say that with all sincerity.
The point that really is compelling to me is the imposition of a religious point of view through the court or through law. I mean, one of the things that served us well is the separation of church and state. That was in our Constitution. And our founding fathers, who many of whom were quite religious, believed that domain should not be in law. It shouldn't be in the Constitution. Or the Constitution protected you and me to have our own religion. That's under attack now, and what you described as Senator Cotton's point of view is the religious view that some people have. But fine, they can have it, but not impose it, especially through the law and through the courts.
And the irony is, I'm Muslim, and for years they kept saying we wanted to impose Sharia law in America, and we didn't. We had no plans. We didn't even know what they meant by it. They were projecting. That's what we've learned now. I'm chatting with Congressman Peter Welch from Vermont, the Democratic nominee for the U.S. Senate in the beautiful state of Vermont. So I was reading in your state, like many states, but in Vermont specifically, every 2 days a person overdoses from drugs in your state. And I imagine opioids are the big issue here. What's going on in Vermont, and how can you address this?
Well, Dean, it's really a tragedy. And, Vermont is not different than New Jersey. It's not different than Iowa. And in fact, Vermont is different because our governor some years ago, then Governor Peter Shumlin, in a State of the State, addressed it as an opioid crisis. And he was the first one to admit that this problem of opioid addiction was severe. And I remember talking to my colleagues in the House saying, why would the governor do that? But then in the next breath, they say, we have the same thing in our state. So the acknowledgement of it has resulted in an immense amount of bipartisan efforts to provide funding for opioid treatment. I work with my House colleagues, and this, Dean, is an area where, seriously, my Republican colleagues, Democratic colleagues, there's oftentimes no difference. They want to get the resources back to the community. And in Vermont, we've had this extraordinarily overtaxed network of mental health providers aggravated by COVID, who are doing everything they can to help our folks who are at that point where they can get treatment to get it. We've had private citizens, like up in Johnson, the Tatro family, who lost their beautiful daughter to an opioid addiction death. They raised money and created Janice House in honor of the daughter to provide treatment. So the silver lining here is the immense community response. So my view, the federal government has to continue providing resources. The hard work of providing that assistance at the local level, that's the local folks. And the other thing I want to say is my colleague, Kathy McMorris Rogers, Republican from Washington, describes these opioid deaths as deaths of despair. There is something about the hollowing out of our communities, that loneliness that so many people are talking about. It's really reflected in higher suicide rates. We've got to rebuild our communities, and that means good jobs, good schools, safe streets, and safe neighborhoods where people have some sense of support from one another as they go through life. So this is an all hands on deck issue where it's both individual treatment and the resources to do that and community rebuilding.
You know, you mentioned suicide, and it's not something that a lot of people like to talk about in the media. It makes people uncomfortable all the time. Because in fact, in daily deaths by guns, 2/3 of daily deaths are by suicide. And I mean, when you're talking about the community and the hollowing out and trying to give people support,
Yeah.
you're speaking of hope, the idea that there's a hopelessness by a generation of people. I talk to younger people, younger than myself, who feel like the system is rigged is a simplistic way, but that they're not going to get what their parents are going to get. They're not going to get the opportunities. And some are held down by student loans. Some are just held down by the pressures of life. And I know there's no simple thing, but what in the Senate, can you do anything to help to give them some sense of hope?
You know, absolutely. I mean, politics is a place where a lot of these challenges are supposed to be worked out. And, you know, what you just described, that is true in a neighborhood where folks voted for Trump. And it's also true in a neighborhood where folks voted for Biden. So, you know, we create better opportunities. We start dealing with climate change. Young people are really, really freaked out about that because they know how bad it is.
Right.
And we've got it. So, and to see us finally doing something gave some hope. We have got to make college affordable. You know, we're dealing with the student debt a bit, but, you know, colleges just kept up increasing their tuition constantly. So kids get out with a mountain of debt. And then, of course, starting wages, especially with inflation, have not kept up with the cost of living. So, you know, that American dream where families had confidence that their kids would be better off than they were is not true now. And so that's not just a gloomy assessment. It's a reality. And we've got to change that.
Yeah, it's a very real thing. It's very palpable when I speak to younger people, as opposed to being optimistic and excited about a future that will be brighter, that weighs them down, that knowing that, and it was a different place where I grew up. I was a child of an immigrant. It was a different experience. I'm the first one that went to college and then law school in my family. So to change gears for a second, Congressman, the Inflation Reduction Act passed. I know you're a big advocate of the cap on prescription drug costs for seniors like my mom. So thank you for that. Could you share a little bit more? Because I really want people to know of the accomplishments of Democrats. And this is a life changer for many seniors.
Well, on prescription drugs, the pharmaceutical industry does a good thing. They come up with life-saving and pain-relieving drugs, but they do a bad thing. They rip us off when they charge us, and they charge us whatever they want to charge us. There's no competition by and large, and they overdo it. So, you know, a vial of insulin that costs $10 to manufacture, they'll charge like $300. That's for a monthly supply, and that's a killer. Or some of these new drugs coming on the market for an illness, $180,000 a year. Now, who can pay that? So there's been no governmental action to try to support taxpayers and consumers. Price negotiation gives us a tool to bring, I think, fairness to the pricing system and then reduce cost. You know, in this country, we inflict the immense expense onto consumers. We pay, you know, 3, 4, sometimes 5 or 6 times here for the same drug as what people buy in Europe or other parts of the world. We've got to change that.
And I'm glad the Inflation Reduction Act was going to play one role in that, with capping out-of-pocket costs for $2,000 for seniors, which is very important for many seniors, and insulin costs. So hopefully more in the future can continue on that path. A couple of quick things before we wrap up. If you're elected to the Senate, would you be in favor of ending the filibuster?
I would. The filibuster is theoretically about bringing people together. What we've seen in practice is that it divides us. It doesn't bring us together. And it's a tool used to prohibit the Senate from even making a public vote on something like reproductive freedom or a public vote on voting rights. So yes, I think that a filibuster is an impediment to accountability and democratic progress.
And earlier you mentioned the Supreme Court and their what really looks like partisan decisions. Would you be supportive of reform of the Supreme Court, whatever that might take shape?
I absolutely would. There's oftentimes been problems with the Supreme Court, but this one is off the rails. And we saw how concerted an effort Mitch McConnell made, along with Donald Trump, to stack the court with Federalist Society, super right-wing judges. My view is the best thing we could do would be have term limits, like 18-year limits. Every president would have the opportunity to appoint 2 new justices. So there'd be an input from the public in who they elected to be president. Then that president would have the certainty of 2 appointments. And you'd be able, I think, with some confidence eventually, to have the views on the Supreme Court be aligned with where America is at.
I agree. Something has to, I never thought of this before in the last few years, the belief that the Supreme Court had to be reformed. I thought it could work out naturally and organically, and where we are now. And it can. Mitch McConnell played a big role in that. By the way, last thing here, you're running against a Trump-loving opponent in Gerald Malloy. How extreme is he? Because I was reading about him, and they say he's a Trump type of conservative. I don't think Trump and conservative work in the same sentence, to be honest. I don't view them as conservatives. Trumpers, they're their own little world. How extreme is he?
He's only been here 2 years, so I don't know much about him. But 2 things that, in my view, are way out of step with where Vermont is. He's a right-to-life candidate. He supports the Dobbs decision, and he said he's going to vote against the reproductive freedom constitutional amendment in our Constitution. So that's taken away a constitutional right. I regard that as an extreme position. Second, he says he wishes he was down there on January 6th. I wish January 6th hadn't happened.
Wow. That's unbelievable to say that he was wished there. Well, we're in a unique time. I mean, this election is about political control. It's about freedom. It's about democracy. There's so much on the ballot. And the website, if people want to see more, welchforvermont.com. Congressman Welch, thanks so much for being on the show. I wish you the best. It's only, I think, 28 days to the election.
You got a month away. And Dean, thank you. And if I make it, we'll know soon enough. I'll be back.
We're going to hold you to that. We're going to be coming, we're going to just be up in Vermont showing up.
You hold me to it.
All right, Congressman, have a great day.
Thanks, Dean.
Thanks for being on. Take care.
Bye-bye.